Dr. S. Sridharan, sir. I am here to deliver the welcome address for this 56th International Virtual Learning Series in association with the Indian Pharmaceutical Association, South Tamil Nadu Local Branch, Head Office at Arulmigu Kalasalingam College of Pharmacy. Today, we are proud to have an eminent academician, veteran teacher, distinguished personality, and well-known administrator and honorable resource person, Professor Dr. A. Shivakumar sir, School of Pharmacy, King Khalid University, Saudi Arabia, to grace this occasion. It is great honor to have with us for this occasion. We thank you for kindly being the valuable part of this session. Let me acquaint you with sterling quality of this eminent personality, who is a brilliant teacher. Sir, your prestigious presence, uh, it is a great motivation and inspiration for our entire student community. We are fully appreciate for you for finding the time to be with us in spite of your busy schedule. Most welcome, Shivakumar sir. Dr. Shivakumar sir, most welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Finally, I welcome all the professor, faculty member, and my dear enthusiastic students for today session. Uh, it is gratifying to note that this session cover a wide range of interesting topic relating to the screening of privilege structure based library on effective lead generation approach. So I hope this session will be good platform for our students. This is the first and foremost needy for your career. My dear students, kindly utilize this great opportunity and explore your knowledge. Once again, I welcome you all. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Dr. Shivakumar sir. Thanks and gratitude for your wonderful support towards the development of our students' career. Please, you can proceed, sir.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to thank the organizers for this opportunity. So I'm going to start this presentation. So the topic for my presentation is screening of a privilege structure-based library, an effective lead generation approach. So this is the outline of my presentation. So I'm going to introduce you to some screening approaches which are used to generate lead compounds. And then I'm going to move on to privilege structures, where I'll define what is a privilege structure. And then I'll talk about some examples of privilege structures. And then I'll discuss about the use of a privilege structure based library. And then I'll move on to the research which I carried out while I was at Temple. This is a pretty old data, but I feel students will find it useful. I hope they will learn something out of this. So I'm going to talk about the design and synthesis of a privileged structure-based library. And then I'll talk about some preliminary biological data. And finally, I'll conclude with a summary and future plans. Now, this terminology we often come across in medicinal chemistry literature, the term lead compound. Now, what is a lead? So the lead is the first significant chemistry milestone along the path to the discovery of a new small molecule drug. So usually medicinal chemists, when they start research, they try to identify a lead compound for a target, and that lead compound is then further optimized to finally it moves on to be developed into a new small molecule drug. Now, when we talk about phases of drug discovery, there are two distinct phases. there is a lead generation phase and a lead optimization phase. Now, what is this lead generation phase? The lead generation phase, it is the process of identifying an appropriate scaffold capable of providing high affinity lead compounds. So in the lead generation phase, we are trying to say, okay, this is my scaffold, and this scaffold will provide high affinity lead compounds. Now, once we have generated the lead, the next phase is the lead optimization phase, where we try to make it more drug-like. We are trying to refine the drug-like characteristics of the lead compound. That's the lead optimization phase. So these are the two phases in drug discovery. Now, the lead generation phase is crucial for subsequent success in the lead optimization phase. Now, when we talk about the lead generation approaches in drug discovery, the traditional approach has been to rely on endogenous ligands, meaning the ligands which are found in the body, or it may be a natural product or even marketed drugs. So the original goal was to improve the affinity of the lead compound by suitable structural modification so that it proves to be efficacious. So the in vivo efficacy was improved by modifying structurally to generate novel leads. So that's how we've been using traditional approach. Now with advances in biochemistry, molecular biology, and new high throughput in vitro assays, newer approaches started being used. So uh, we've been using high throughput screening, fragment based screening, and virtual or in silico screening. So these are some newer approaches. Now I'm going to talk about each of these approaches with few examples in the next few slides. So the first one is the often used approach, which is the high throughput screening or HTS. Now, what is this high throughput screening? Here in this, hundreds of thousands of compounds are screened to identify lead compounds. Generally, pharma companies, what they have their own corporate collection of compounds, say 100,000 or 200,000 compounds. So whenever they work on a research area, they try to screen those compounds to identify lead compounds. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about some success stories of this approach. So here, Bayer, right, a company, they have their own corporate compound collection, and they were trying to identify a reversible inhibitor of this protein target, cysteine protease cathepsin K. Now, this is a protein which is involved in bone resorption. So, if I were to inhibit this protein, it will prevent that bone resorption. So, it is an anti-resorptive agent. So, that's what they are trying to identify. So, they screen their compound collection through this high throughput screening assay, and they identified an aryl ketone lead molecule. The initial lead molecule had an IC50 value of 1.2 micromole. And further lead optimization, right? First lead generation and then further lead optimization efforts, they led to a compound, this particular compound, right, with an IC50 value of 230 nanomole. So the M is missing there, it's nanomole. So from 1.2 micromole, which was the IC50 value of the lead compound, they were able to optimize it in such a way that the final compound, this compound, has an IC50 value of 230 nanomole. So basically the use of anti-resorptive agents, that's what is given here. They reduce the bone loss by decreasing the osteoclastic cells which are involved in bone resorption. So this is the success story of a high throughput screening approach from Bayer. Now similarly, hello, can you hear me, sir? Is there a problem? Can I continue? Okay. So Pfizer, similarly, they have their own compound collection, and they were trying to identify a non-peptidic inhibitor of this target HIV protease. So they screened their compound collection through this high throughput screening, and they identified 4-hydroxypyrone, and they found that, see, if you see the IC50 values of the initial compound, it was 3 micromole and then 35 nanomole, and finally the lead optimization effort ended in this compound CI1029, which has a pyrone. Actually, it should be a pyrone, oxygen should be there. Actually, it's a non-peptidic HIV protease inhibitor with an EC50 value of 200 nanomole and a therapeutic index greater than 1000. So this is also an example of a success story. They started with the lead compound with a higher, even though it was in micromolar concentration, and then further lead optimization they were able to do, and they ended in a compound which has a better therapeutic index and an EC50 value around 200 nanomole. So this is from Pfizer. So similarly, the high throughput screening in Merck company has a corporate compound collection of 250,000 compounds. So they were also trying to identify protease inhibitors. And when they did the high throughput screening, they identified a diketo acid compound, which was just 2-fold less potent than the commercially available HIV protease inhibitor Endinavir. And the advantage was that it did not exhibit any cytotoxicity in cell cultures up to 50 micromole concentration. So this is the story from Merck. And finally, the last example I have here is from SmithKline Beecham, which is now part of GSK. So they were screening their own compound collection, and they identified bis-aryl sulfonamide as a high affinity ligand for 5-HT6 receptor subtype. So this is a serotonin receptor subtype. And further optimization efforts led to this compound SB271046, which is in phase 1 clinical trials for the treatment of cognitive disorders. So what I've shown here is I've discussed some examples where this high throughput screening approach has been successfully used, where the screening of those hundreds of compounds resulted in a lead compound, and in some cases they went to further lead optimization effort, resulting in a high affinity lead compound. Now, in spite of all these success stories, HTS often it results in low hit rates, and many of the hits they fail to progress through the lead optimization phase. So even though I have shared some success stories, it is not always that every lead compound ends up as a preclinical candidate. It doesn't happen that way. It results in sometimes low hit rates. So that's the disadvantage of this approach. Now, the next approach I'm going to talk about, which is a fragment-based screening method. Now, in this fragment-based screening, low molecular weight fragments with molecular weights between 125 to 250 and with lower log partition coefficient values, they are screened for binding activity. And then they identify some fragments, and those fragments are then combined or optimized to generate novel lead compounds. So here I have an example here. So the company Abbott, they initially did a high throughput screen of they had some 115,000 compounds. When they did a high throughput screen of their compound collection, they identified 2 fragments. Okay. And these 2 fragments, what they found was that they were bound to 2 distinct pockets in the enzyme active site. So 2 distinct pockets, they found these 2 fragments were binding. So that's the dissociation constant value for those 2 fragments given here. Now what they did was they linked these 2 fragments by a 2-carbon linker. Okay, so that's your 2-carbon linker. So if you remember fragment-based screening, they either combine the fragments or optimize the fragments to generate this novel lead compound. So they connected these two fragments by a 2-carbon linker, and that's the dissociation constant, the high affinity for the enzyme active site, right? 15 nanomole. So that's a example of a success story of this particular fragment-based approach, and they were trying to determine a metalloproteinase 3 inhibitor. So that's how they use this fragment-based screening approach to identify the lead compound. But uh, this fragment-based approach has some difficulties. So especially in identifying fragments which are weakly binding to their biological targets and then linking them into a high affinity lead. So it's a real challenge. It's not that easy when you use this approach, trying to identify the fragments which has low affinity and then you try to combine them to generate a higher affinity lead compound. It's a big challenge, especially with this fragment based screening approach. And the next is sometimes it used to be a really popular approach, the virtual or in silico screening, right? So the advantage of this approach is that you don't need compounds really. So the compounds which are not part of the database can also be screened using this virtual screening approach. Now, virtual screening, it is of two types. So there is a target structure based and a ligand based virtual screening approach. So in target structure based approach, a technique or method used is your high throughput docking. So that's what is done. So all these programs which I mentioned here, they adopt this approach of high throughput docking where it finds the complementary match between the macromolecule target and the ligand. So that's the use of this target structure base. And we also know the 3D structure of the target protein here. Okay. Now in the ligand base, we don't know the 3D structure of the protein target, but we know a ligand which binds to the protein target. So that ligand is used as a reference compound, and all the compounds in the database are superposed on the reference compound with the chemically similar parts are placed above it, and they give a rank score on the similarities, or similarity score is given for those compounds. Now, what is the advantage of this virtual screening? Compounds which are not part of the database can also be screened using this approach. And since it gives it accurately predicts the binding affinity computationally, we don't have to screen a lot of compounds. Only a subset of compounds need to be screened in this virtual or in silico screening approach. Now, having said that, the virtual or in silico screening, it continues to be refined with increase in the computational power, right? But it is generally considered as a viable alternative to traditional screening methods. Having said that, in recent literature, what I've been observing is that this virtual screening or the molecular modeling, which we call it, it is used to more in an effort to understand an observed affinity. So no longer people simply predict, okay, this compound is going to bind to the target. Rather, after the biological assay and they find some compound is really having a higher affinity, they use this tool to find out why is that a particular compound has a higher affinity. Meaning, in order to understand an observed affinity, these tools are being used these days. Okay, so I've discussed some screening approaches, right? Now, one thing one thing which determines, or it's an important factor in all of these three approaches, is that the kind of screening libraries which are used. So when we talk about screening libraries, there are two kinds of screening libraries. So you have a commercial libraries, so which you buy, and those libraries are owned by these corporate companies, or there is a natural product based libraries. Now each libraries have their own downsides or disadvantages. For example, in commercial libraries, it often results in low hit rate. So we get very low hits. Now the reason for these low hit rate is because of poor physicochemical properties, and it lacks the required structural diversity. So because of that, commercial libraries often result in low hit rate. Now, if you compare the other type of library, the natural product based libraries, it overcomes the issue of low hit rate. You get a better hit rate, but it seldom leads to an activity which is different from the parent compound, because in natural product libraries, it is just a simple derivative of the parent compound. So it is just a collection of simple derivatives of the parent compound. So you don't get any distinct activity from the parent compound. So in this regard, if we were to use a privileged structure based library, it may lead to drug like lead compounds, and it could offer good starting points for further lead optimization effort. Now I've introduced the term privileged structure based library. Now I'm going to talk about what is a privileged structure in the next few slides. Privileged structure. So this term was coined by Evans, who worked at Merck in the late 80s. So they were trying to work on this particular lead compound, 1,4-benzodiazepine 2-one, and they were trying to identify uh, inhibitor or antagonist for this protein target, cholecystokinin A receptor target. And what they found was that this leader, 1,4-benzodiazepine 2-one scaffold, was also found in drugs which are anxiolytics, anticonvulsants, sedatives, and opioids, in addition to being a cholecystokinin A antagonist. So, based on this observation, he defined privileged structures as ligand substructures capable of providing useful ligands for more than one receptor, and that judicious modification of such structures could be a viable alternative in the search for new receptor agonists and antagonists. So if you have a core structure, which we term it as a privileged structure, and if you were to make some structural modifications, you can target more than one biological target. So that's the definition of a privileged structure. Now, since I've defined the privileged structure, the question that comes in the mind is, so is a methyl group privileged? When can we call something as a privileged structure? Now, in order for a scaffold to be considered privileged, a substructure needs to represent a molecule's core element, and it should make up a significant portion of its total mass. So it should be the majority of the compound's mass should be from that core structure. Then only you can refer it to as a privileged structures. Now, these privileged structures, they provide a way for medicinal chemists to build a library, compound library, based on the core scaffold and screen it against an assortment of different receptors. Now, here I've given in this slide some examples of privileged structure unit found in drugs. So here, for example, this is a benzodiazepine privileged structure. So here I've given two examples. So there is some periphery. In the periphery of this is the core, and that's the periphery. I'll refer to it as. So if you see, here is some structural elements surrounding this core, and it acts as a cholecystokinin A receptor antagonist. Further structural modification, there's a chlorine, and then there is a phenyl ring. It becomes a GABA A modulator. So the same core structure with subtle structural modification, you can target two different biological targets. Here is another example, indole. So that's the privileged structure unit. So here it is a 5-HT6 antagonist, and here it's a COX inhibitor. So same structural core, structural modification in the periphery, you can target two different biological targets. So here purine is the structural core. So it's a reverse transcriptase inhibitor here, and here it is a estrogen sulfotransferase inhibitor. So the same core, subtle modification in the structure, you're going to target two different biological targets. And here the last example I have here is dihydropyridine, which is found in your calcium channel blockers, right? And subtle modification in the periphery, you have another inhibitor, sorry, platelet activating factor inhibitor. So here I've given very few examples of privileged structure units. So actually there is a recent book written by Larry Ett called Privileged Structure Units, and it gives a detailed account of what are all privileged structures and what kind of drugs have been generated using this privileged structure approach. Now here in this slide, I've given some examples where they've used this core structure and then they've generated compound libraries and screened it in a biological assay. So here is an example, 1,4-benzodiazepine, a library of 192 structurally diverse compounds were synthesized using solid phase synthesis. And then they were screened for their ability to bind to this receptor, cholecystokinin A receptor. And this is the compound they identified, lead compound, IC50 value 80 nanomole. So here is another example of a privileged structure-based library. So in this case, it is quinazolinone, right? Quinazolinone is the core structure, and a library of 44 compounds were synthesized, and these compounds were screened for cytotoxic activity, and they are trying to develop novel tubulin polymerization inhibitors. So that's the lead compound, IC50 value of 13 nanomole. So in addition to that, I want to share one more example where they use this approach of a privileged structure-based library. So in this particular article, what they have done is that they selected 6 privileged structure units. So there is a diphenyl methane, the benzimidazole, 2-aminothiazole, 1,2-diphenyl substitution scaffold, and piperazine, and 4-aminopyperidine. So these are the 6 privileged structure units. And these structure units, using this, they developed a compound library. They synthesized a compound library of 6 arrays of 230 compounds. And then they screened these compounds in a variety of G protein coupled receptor assays or GPCR assays. And they got several hits. Actually, the hit rate is 6%. So generally, when we talk about high throughput screening approach, we get a hit rate of less than 1%. So that's the downside of generally when we go for a high throughput screening, it is less than 1%. Here is an example where they used a privileged structure based library and screened it in an assay, in a variety of assays, and the hit rate was 6%. So which is higher than the normal hit rate which we observe in a high throughput screening campaign. And further lead optimization, they ended up in a compound which is a inverse agonist for this cannabinoid receptor CB1 subtype with a Ki value of 15 nanomole, and it has a greater than 2000-fold selectivity for CB1 receptor subtype over cannabinoid receptor CB2 receptor subtype. So here is an example where they use privileged structure units, synthesized the library, screened it in a variety of GPCR assays, and they identified several hits. And further lead optimization, they ended up in a compound which had a selectivity over one particular receptor. So this is really the success story of this using privileged structure-based library for screening. Now, this privileged structure unit, there is a relationship when it comes to G protein coupled receptors, because the recurrence of these privileged structure, if you were to look at the most of the ligands which target this GPCRs, the reason is that greater than 30% of the marketed drugs, they target GPCRs. That is one reason. And you will notice if you were to look at all the ligands which are reported against GPCRs, there is a recurrence of these privileged structure units. So that is something we'll find in the MedChem literature. Okay. So what I've done is that I've given all the screening approaches generally used for lead generation, and then I've talked about what is a privilege structure, right? I've given some examples of privilege structure unit in drugs, and then I moved on to examples where using a privilege structure based library, they were able to generate lead compounds. So based on this background, I'm going to talk about the approach we used for developing a privilege structure based library. So for our library development strategies, first I need to identify a privilege structure, and then develop synthetic strategies and or utilize literature procedures to prepare the privilege structures, and then identify fragments from the literature shown to bind diverse target proteins, and use well-known reactions to incorporate fragments on the privilege structure, and to include microwave-assisted organic synthesis to reduce reaction times. So these are my library development strategies. So I'm going to go through each of those bullet points now. So the privilege structure I identified is the 2-aminothiazole scaffold. Now this is taken from a database, the Kyoto Encyclopedia of Genes and Genomes database. So this is my core structure, 2-aminothiazole, right? If you see, it is found in this sulfathiazole, which is an antibacterial, and in ceftriaxone with the beta-lactam ring, right, cephalosporin. So that also has the aminothiazole core. And aztreonum, another antibacterial, that has the aminothiazole. And here are some examples of drugs in phase 2, right? MZ338, which is a muscarinic agonist, M1 and M2 antagonist, sorry, and acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. So that has the aminothiazole core. And here is an example of a drug, an anti-inflammatory drug, meloxicam, and that has the aminothiazole core. And pramipexole, here it is a dopamine D2, D3 agonist that has the aminothiazole core. And here is an example, riluzole, which is a drug approved for treating a neurodegenerative disorder, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. And it is also a modulator of glutamate transporter, GLT1 modulator. So that's there, that has the aminothiazole core. And then here is another example, CBS1138, which is a COX or 5-lipoxygenase inhibitor, and that has the aminothiazole core. And finally, a 5-HT1A agonist, and that also has a aminothiazole core. So this indicates that this aminothiazole core is a recurring fragment in lead compounds and in marketed drugs. So I identified this as my privilege structure now. Then I looked up the literature to find out how to synthesize this aminothiazole scaffold. So I found several methods by which you can synthesize these 2-aminothiazole scaffold. So here is a synthetic route. So starting from the acetophenone, by selectively monobrominating this acetophenone to generate the alpha bromoketone, followed by in situ cyclocondensation with thiourea, right? So first bromination selectively here, and then that alpha bromoketone is condensed with thiourea to generate the aminothiazole. So the yields are between 40 to 82%. So that's one literature method I found. Another literature method was using iodine 1 equivalent and thiourea 2 equivalents. You generate this aminothiazole, around the yield is around 85%. But I really wanted to find a microwave assisted organic synthesis method. So because generally it is considered when we use microwave assisted organic synthesis, it speeds up the reaction times. It will reduce the reaction time really. And I found a microwave synthesis method in the literature for that. So here is a microwave synthesis approach where they use a alpha bromoketone with thiourea, and in the presence of ethanol as the solvent using microwave at 50 degrees and for 10 minutes. In just 10 minutes, you can synthesize this aminothiazole scaffold, and the yield is pretty good, 98% yield. So basically, I found out some synthetic methods in the literature to prepare this aminothiazole core now. And I've also identified a microwave assisted organic synthesis method, because if you see the reaction time, it is just 10 minutes. So that will speed up my reaction efforts. So microwave assisted organic synthesis, generally what we do is that we use sealed vessels containing the reaction mixtures, and they are efficiently heated using microwave irradiation under controlled conditions with the monitoring of temperature and pressure. Now, what is the advantage of microwave assisted organic synthesis? Significant enhancement in reaction rates from hours, it becomes minutes, and sometimes even within seconds you can synthesize the required compound. So here is a slide which shows the difference. So conventional heating, sometimes it is largely inefficient, and sometimes there is localized hotspot. But when you compare it to a microwave assisted organic synthesis, MOS, so it generates heats from within the sample, and the heat is distributed outwards, which results in instantaneous and rapid and uniform heating of the entire sample. So that's the advantage of your microwave assisted organic. If you compare it, both are basically heating. Even though we use microwaves, the process is heating, but the heat is more efficient since it is from within the sample. So that's the difference between conventional heating and microwave assisted organic synthesis. Okay, now I identified a scaffold. I've identified some literature procedures for synthesizing the scaffold, and I've also identified a microwave assisted organic synthesis method to synthesize the aminothiazole scaffold. And then I looked up at the literature to identify fragments that I'm going to incorporate on the core structure of aminothiazole. So when I looked up the literature, I found some fragments. So here I've identified some muscarinic and serotonin fragments, meaning these fragments, when you look at muscarinic ligands or serotonin ligands, you will definitely come across these fragments. And then I've also identified some antibacterial fragments and also glutamate transporter 1 modulator fragments. Now this lactone or the furanone, right? Now these two fragments, actually where I worked at Temple, our lab mates, they were working on muscarinic ligands, and they were using these lactone fragments for their muscarinic ligands. So I identified that as a ligand for muscarinic receptor. So I've incorporated these fragments on my aminothiazole core. So in addition to that, we have this piperidine fragment and the pyridopiperazine and pyridopiperidine fragments. So if you notice, if you read a medchem literature, and especially serotonin and muscarinic receptors, you will come across these piperidines and pyridopiperazine or pyridopiperidine fragments. And these beta lactams, 7-aminocephalosporanic acid. Now that is an antibacterial fragment. And sulfonamides are antibacterial, so that's also a fragment which I'm going to incorporate on the aminothiazole core. And finally, I showed one of the drugs, riluzole, right, which is used for treating a neurodegenerative disorder, and that's a glutamate transporter modulator, right? Now that has this fragment. So I've identified bioactive fragments which I need to incorporate on my aminothiazole core. Okay. Now I'm going to summarize what I've just talked about. So privileged structure-based libraries, they produce hits against a host of biological targets that we already seen. And I've identified 2-aminothiazole, and that is a recurring scaffold in compounds of therapeutic interest. And then there are high-yield synthetic methods are available in the literature, especially a microwave-assisted organic synthesis method I've identified. And I've identified fragments in the literature to bind various targets that may be incorporated on the aminothiazole scaffold. And screening of this structurally diverse library will provide leads for a variety of targets. That's my hypothesis. So based on this background information, I'm going to state my hypothesis. So here I've identified a phenyl substituted aminothiazole and a fused one and a non-fused. I'm going to call this a non-fused aminothiazole core and a fused aminothiazole core. Now I'm going to use these bioactive fragments. I'm going to identify synthetic methods to incorporate on this aminothiazole core to synthesize a privileged structure-based library. And that library of compounds will then be screened in a variety of assays. So I'm going to screen it for an antimicrobial assay because I've incorporated some antibacterial fragments. And then I'm going to do screen it in a muscarinic binding assay and for serotonin functional assay, and finally GLT1 modulation assay. The hypothesis is that this particular privileged structure based library with the required bioactive fragments is likely to result in some lead compounds. That's my hypothesis. Now how I'm going to test my hypothesis, I'm going to do that in the next step. These are my specific aims. So how I'm going to test my hypothesis. So first is to design ligands using the aminothiazole scaffold as the privileged structure that includes structurally diverse fragments reported to bind various target proteins. And the second specific aims to develop synthetic strategies that incorporate diverse functionality and employ microwave assisted organic synthesis at key steps. Use those synthetic routes to prepare a privileged structure based library. And the third specific aim is to evaluate the compound library in a variety of biological assays, antibacterial, modulators of serotonin and muscarinic receptors, GLT1 transporters, and use the biological data to direct the molecular modification of the lead compounds. Now, these are my specific aims with which I'm going to test my hypothesis. So this is my library design now. So as I mentioned, I've taken two aminothiazole cores, the non-fused and the fused aminothiazole core. So if X were a bromo, I'm going to use carbon-carbon coupling reactions to incorporate the pyridopyperidine and pyridopyperazine fragments and also the trifluoromethoxyphenyl fragment and also the piperidine fragment. Now further secondary modification will be done with this lactone fragment, which I mentioned, if you remember, they were muscarinic fragments, right? Now those compounds will be tested for their muscarinic receptor modulating activity. And then this carboxyl containing fragment will be incorporated on the scaffold using carbon-carbon coupling reaction, and it will be subjected to amidation with this antibacterial fragment, which is the 7-aminocephalosporanic acid. And the carboxylic acid directly, if there's a carboxylic acid here, that also can be subjected to amidation with this 7-aminocephalosporanic acid. And the amino end of the scaffold will be subjected to sulfonamidation because sulfonamide, right, that's also an antibacterial fragment. So substituted sulfonyl chlorides will be used to amidate or subject this amine to sulfonamidation. And also I'm going to use some substituted thiourea to generate 3-fluoro-substituted amino fragment here. So similar approaches will be used for the fused scaffold, where I'm going to use the similar reactions, except that this aminothiazole is a fused core now. Now these two cores will be used to generate the required compound library. So specific aim 2, if you remember, it was to develop the synthetic strategies that will incorporate diverse functionality. So I want to make it structurally diverse so that it can target the required biological proteins. And I'm also going to use microwave assisted organic synthesis because that's going to reduce my reaction time. So here it gives a broad scheme of what are the synthetic methods I'm going to use in this library approach. So alpha bromoketone, if you remember, I found a literature method, right, using microwave assisted organic synthesis. I'm going to make this aminothiazole scaffold. Another method, I'm going to use that iodine and thiourea, right? That was also a thermal method. So a microwave method as well as a thermal method will be used based on the availability of the alpha bromoketone. If some commercially available alpha bromoketone is there, I'm going to go for this microwave assisted organic synthesis. If it is not available, I will go for the thermal method using iodine and thiourea. And this fused core is commercially available. I'm going to directly use this aminothiazole, bromo aminothiazole, which is commercially available, and further do the structural modification. So the amino end will be subjected to sulfonamidation with sulfonyl chlorides. And I'm going to use Suzuki coupling. So carbon-carbon coupling. Suzuki reaction is a well-known reaction. It's a carbon-carbon coupling reaction between an organic halide and a boronic acid or boronic ester in the presence of palladium catalyst. Now that's your Suzuki coupling, and that I'm going to do it under microwave conditions. So it's going to be microwave Suzuki coupling. So I'm going to synthesize those derivatives. And finally, if you remember, I talked about the lactone or furanone muscarinic fragment, right? So using amine displacements, I'm going to synthesize these lactone containing aminothiazole. And also the amidation will be done with my 7-aminocephalosporanic acid. So coupling reactions, right? Peptide coupling like that. I'm going to use that. And similarly, microwave coupling with the lactone with this fused scaffold, right? That also I'm going to do. So this is just a broad outline of the different schemes I'm going to use for this synthesis of this compound library using this aminothiazole core, the non-fused and the fused core. So, so here is a in this slide, I just show what are the non-fused scaffolds I have synthesized. So what I've basically done is that I've identified a commercially available alpha bromoketones, right? And all these alpha bromoketones. So if you see, there is a 3-bromo, 4-bromo, 4 trifluoromethoxy, and then 4-methoxy, and then you have a benzofuran, naphthyl, and morpholine containing piperidine, pyrrolidine containing, piperidine containing, adamantyl group containing. Now all these are commercially available alpha bromoketones I've taken, and then I've used either thiourea or substituted thiourea. So substituted thiourea, I've used fluoro substituted thiourea. So I've subjected to microwave conditions, 50 degrees for 10 minutes using either ethanol or sometimes methanol if needed. And the yield somewhere between 20% to 96% yield to generate this aminothiazole core. So I've synthesized some structurally diverse aminothiazole scaffolds now. So in addition to that, there are some additional scaffolds I've synthesized. So here, this one is a different scaffold. It is a 2-bromocyclohexanone. This is also alpha bromoketone, but it's a fused scaffold. So I've synthesized this fused scaffold. In addition to the benzamminothiazole, which I'll show in a later slide. So this is also an example of a fused scaffold. And then I've also used the second thermal method, right? So where I have the substituted acetophenone, I've taken 1 equivalent of iodine, 2 equivalents of thiourea, heated it at 100 degrees centigrade to generate the aminothiazole scaffold. So not only the microwave method, I also had another alternate method just in case some if I want a particular aminothiazole scaffold and I don't have the alpha bromoketone commercially available, I went for this thermal method. So I've also used thermal method to synthesize these aminothiazole scaffold. And for synthesizing those scaffolds with the carboxyl esters, so what I did, I took this acetophenone with the carboxyl containing acetophenone, and then I've esterified with trimethylsilyl diazomethane methanol toluene conditions. So it's a very good agent for methylating the carboxylic acids. And then this ester is subjected to the same method here, thermal method, to generate the required aminothiazole scaffold. So I've synthesized the aminothiazole scaffold now. Now then I'm going to do the further structural modification. So the next, sorry. So the next is sulfonamidation. So sulfonamidation, I've used benzene sulfonyl chloride or substitute benzene sulfonyl chloride in the presence of pyridine from 0 degrees centigrade to room temperature conditions, where I have subjected this amine to self-numidation. So the yields are, I wouldn't say great, but somewhere between say 13 to 60% yield. And also I've used this fused scaffold that I subjected to self-inhibition using a trifluor methyl substituted sulfonyl chloride to generate this compound. So I have prepared some of the compounds I'm subjected to self-inhibition. So then the microwave Suzuki coupling, which I mentioned. So Suzuki, as I mentioned, is a reaction in which we have a carbon-carbon coupling between the organic halides. So in this case, I have the 3-bromo, 4-bromo, and the 2-bromo, right? So that I have the organic halide have, and then commercially available boronic acids or boronic esters are taken, and then I have the palladium catalyst and a base. So sodium carbonate or potassium carbonate base was used, and under microwave conditions, so I used a mixture of a solvent, so THF water in the ratio of 1:1, and I used microwave conditions of 140 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes to synthesize the required microwave Suzuki coupling compounds. So I've used two different palladium catalysts, tetrakis or trans dichlorobis triphenyl phosphine palladium catalyst. So these are the different boronic esters or boronic acids I've used for the synthesis of this coupling products. So the similar conditions were used for the fused. If you remember, I mentioned about commercially available fused aminobenzothiazole. So that I've used 5 and 6-bromo. So the same 2 molar as a base, sodium carbonate base, the boronic acid or the boronic ester. So that's my halide, right? So organic halide is there. So the boronic acid or boronic ester is taken in the presence of palladium catalyst. So either tetrakis or the other one, triphenyl diphenyl phosphine palladium chloride, right? So the other catalyst, and under microwave conditions using THF water 1:1 ratio and 140 degrees centigrade for 30 minutes. So that was a microwave Suzuki coupling, and to generate the coupling products. Now I mentioned about two palladium catalysts, right? Now the two palladium catalysts, what is the difference? Why did I use the two different catalysts? Tetrak is an often used palladium catalyst. It is light and air sensitive, so that's a disadvantage. So you need to keep it under an atmosphere of nitrogen when we use these reaction conditions. So, and this is the catalytic cycle. So this tetrakis, it becomes a diphenyl phosphine species, which then undergoes oxidative addition with the bromoaminothiazole. So that's the oxidative addition product, and then the reaction proceeds. Now, when you compare these two catalysts, this tetrakis, it is sensitive to light and air. So the reaction, sometimes it may not proceed to completion. Whereas this particular catalyst, dichlorobis triphenyl phosphine palladium, that's considered a stable catalyst. And what I found is that this was a better catalyst compared to tetrakis. And because the reaction is faster when compared to tetrakis. This oxidative addition step is the rate determining step, and that seems to be proceeding faster because there are vacant coordination sites in this compared to this is highly ligated compound, right? If you see, there are 4 phosphine molecules. Here there are only 2 phosphine molecules. So thus, and this change, it happens faster, and the oxidative addition also happens faster. And moreover, this catalyst is more stable under the conditions of your microwave conditions, whereas this one is more light and air sensitive. So that's the difference between these two catalysts. So what I found in this research is that this catalyst is better compared to tetrakis. So the piperidine and pyridopiperazine based aminothiols. So if you remember, I mentioned them as the muscarinic and serotonin fragments, right? So,
Sir, excuse me, sir.
yes.
Slide correct போதா சார்?
அப்பப்போ it stop ஆயிடுது சார், ஏன்னு தெரியல.
அதான் சார். ஏன்னா இப்போ 37வது நம்பர் ஸ்லைடில் இருக்கு சார். 37 ஸ்லைடில் இருக்கு. கரெக்டா சார் அது?
ஆமாமா சார், 37 தான். ஆனா
ஓகே,
அது ஏதோ காட்டுது, டேக் கண்ட்ரோல்னு ஏதோ காட்டுது.
அதான் சார், நீங்க ஏதோ கிளிக் பண்ணி தான் நினைக்கிறேன் சார். அதனால தான் சொல்றேன். ஏன்னா டைம்ல இருந்து அடுத்து 32க்கு போச்சு, அடுத்து 37க்கு வந்துச்சு. அதனால தான் கேட்குறேன் சார்.
ஓ, உங்களுக்கு வரலையா? சீக்வென்ஷியல வரலையா?
இடையில மிஸ் ஆகுது சார்.
மிஸ் ஆகுதா?
ஆமா சார்.
ஏன்னா எனக்கு ஏதோ டேக் கண்ட்ரோல்னு காட்டுது. டேக் கண்ட்ரோல் கிளிக் பண்ணுமா?
இல்ல வேண்டாம் சார், வேண்டாம். அது நீங்க கண்ட்ரோல் மேபி கிளிக் பண்ணிருப்பேன் நினைக்கிறேன். அதை கிளிக் பண்ணாம நீங்க ஜெனரலா கண்டினியூ பண்ணுங்க சார். கரெக்டா வந்துடும் சார்.
ஓகே சார். சோ நான் வெறும் அந்த ஆரோ கிளிக் பண்ணா அடுத்த ஸ்லைட் போய்டும் இல்லையா?
ஆமா, அடுத்து மூவ் ஆகும், அப்படியே மூவ் ஆகும் சார்.
ஓகே சார். ஓகே
சார்.
So in this slide, it's the pyridopiperidines, right? It's a N-Bock protected piperidine. So that has to be deprotected using trifluoroacetic acid in the presence of dichloromethane. So that gives this pyridopiperidine and pyridopiperazine containing aminothiazoles. So then I'm going to talk about furanone-based muscarinic glycan. If you remember, I talked about this lactone or furanone fragment, which used to be used in our lab as muscarinic fragments. So these are some examples which was synthesized in our lab, and it showed percentage inhibition of muscarinic receptors, right? So if you see the percentage inhibition of this compound, 99%. So generally greater than 50% percentage inhibition of atropine ligand binding is considered as a very good affinity for the muscarinic receptor. And if you see the IC50 values, it is 17 nanomole for this particular compound, and here it is 340 nanomole, and and it has a 97% inhibition. Sorry. So can I go back? Okay. So what I did was that I got these furanone starting materials with toluene sulfonate, right? So tosylate, I got it from my lab mate, right? Furanone starting materials, which I want to incorporate on my aminothiazole core. So that was my idea. So in the next slide,
I can control, sir. We can proceed, sir.
Okay. So here the furanone bose. So I have the piperidine, right? So that piperidine containing. Can you go back, sir? Yeah. So that also I did an amine displacement reaction. So this piperidine will displace this tosylate to generate this lactone containing aminothiazole, and that also was done under microwave conditions, 120 degrees centigrade, but it took a longer time, 1 hour in THF solvent and NN diisopropyl ethylamine as the base. So I did it for the non-fused scaffold as well as the fused scaffold. I was able to generate these 5 lactone-based or furanone-based aminothiazole compounds. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the beta-lactam-based aminothiazoles. So that, if you remember, I mentioned that as a antibacterial fragment, right? So I used a 3-step method to make this beta-lactam-based aminothiazoles. So here, this aminothiazole scaffold, the amino end is protected using a trityl chloride in the presence of pyridine. So that amino gets protected with this trityl group. And then the carboxyl ester, right? So that this contains the carboxyl ester. The R1 is the carboxyl ester. So that I hydrolyze it with 2 normal sodium hydroxide. So I have this protected aminothiazole now. And then I subject it to the second step where I've used a particular peptide coupling reagent known as CDMT, which is actually 2-chloro 4,6. So 2-chloro 4,6 dimethoxy triazine. So that's my coupling reagent to generate the activated ester. So this acid, right? So that I subjected to activation using this peptide coupling reagent in the presence of morpholin and DMF to generate this activated ester. So I've synthesized an activated ester. So in the next step, I'm going to talk about the third step. The next slide. Okay. So here, this is my 7-aminocephalosporanic acid, which is commercially available. So that is insoluble. I need to make it soluble. So I need to silylate it. So convert it to a silyl derivative. So that's the first step at 0 degrees centigrade, treating with N-O-bis trimethyl silyl acetamide for 30 minutes. If I just run it, it becomes silylated here. So that becomes a silyl derivative. Now it becomes soluble. And then I add this activated ester to this silylated 7-aminocephalosporanic acid derivative to generate my compound. And final step is the deprotection of the silyl, that I do it in the presence of trifluoroacetic acid and anisole. So using this 3 steps, I made these 4 beta-lactam based aminothiazoles. The yields were very low. Generally, in medicinal chemistry, the approach is more to make enough of the compound to do the testing, the characterization using proton or the LC mass spec, and then enough to do the testing. So the yields are not a main concern. We just want to test if this particular compound is active or not. So that's the aim. So we don't really, the yield is not the major concern in the initial lead generation step. So that's what I want to say. So I've generated 4 beta-lactam based aminothiazoles. The next specific aim to screen it in a variety of assays. So to evaluate the compound library in a variety of biological assays. So I have the antimicrobial assays, the muscarinic modulating assay, and the serotonin receptors, and GLT1 transporter assay. So all these assays, they were not done at Temple. We had some collaborators who did the screening for us. So the antimicrobial screening, generally more deaths are caused by especially the methicillin resistant SRS in the US each year when compared to even HIV and AIDS. So we are going to screen against this methicillin resistant SRS strains. So the MIC, the minimum inhibitory concentration, was determined against a panel of methicillin resistant microorganisms. So here I have SRS, E. coli, and Abomani, and those are the strains which were used. And they were screened in a different place with our collaborator at University of Nebraska and University of Rochester, New York. They only did the antimicrobial assay for us. So in the next slide. So 32 compounds were screened in the antimicrobial assay, and we have identified some compounds with very high MIC values. Here we have an MIC value of this compound, which is 2 to 4 microgram. So we thought around 8 microgram or less than 8 microgram is pretty significant MIC value. So here it's the most potent compound with MIC value between 2 to 4 microgram per ml. And then the trifluoromethoxy, if you remember this phenyl, this fragment, which was found in riluzole, right? So that also showed an MIC value around 4 to 8 microgram. Here it's a different, it's a it's like a 4 substituted phenyl, right? So that also showed an MIC value of 2 microgram per ml. So this showed 16 micrograms. So the trifluoromethoxy derivatives, all 3 of them, they showed pretty high MIC values. And then the fused scaffold. So these are all the non-fused scaffolds, right? So the fused scaffold that also showed MIC in the range of 8 to 16 microgram per ml. And also a beta lactam based aminothiazole was also tested, which showed an MIC value of 16 microgram per ml. So basically 32 compounds screened, and we have identified some lead compounds. And then the lactone or the furanone based aminothiazoles, they were subjected to the muscarinic receptor binding assay. This was sent to CEREP, which is in France. So that is where these assays, receptor based assays, were done. So here is the result of non-selective muscarinic binding assay, and the concentration was 10 micromole concentration of these compounds, of these furanone based aminothiazoles, and it gives the percentage inhibition of specific binding of radioligand atropine. Now, generally, greater than 50% inhibition, if it is there, it is considered a significant value. And here we have some compounds with around 93% and 94%, and this one is around 92%. So these are some lactone-based aminothiazole lead compounds which are higher percent inhibition of atropine binding. So that we found. And the last activity was the serotonin receptor binding assay. So that was also done at CEREP. It's a functional assay. So they are looking at agonist response or an antagonist response. So here in this table, it gives the structures that were used for the agonist response as well as the antagonist response. And 3 receptor subtypes were tested: 5-HT1A, 5-HT2C, and 5-HT6. Now, those numbers, it might look very odd, but I just want you to focus on that which has a greater than 50% is considered significant response. So here, if you see, can you just move the slide once? Okay, so this one is almost 121% agonist response when compared to the control. So that's pretty significant data. Now, if in the next few slides, I'm going to show some agonist and antagonist response. So here also, these are all piperidine containing aminothiazoles. So if you see, pretty significant. So the agonist response and the antagonist response. Okay. So if you see the data, so greater than 100%. So that's also pretty good agonist response. So that is also for the this is for, if you, and one more thing I want to mention here, it's specifically for one receptor subtype, which is 5-HT1A. So the previous slide which I showed you, that was also for 5-HT1A receptor subtype. It is showing a higher agonist response. Okay, can you go to the next slide? Okay, I think this is the last slide, I guess, here. So here also, if you see around 50% agonist response. So basically, what we found is that all those piperidines and piridopiperidines and piridopiperazines, which I had screened for the serotonin-based assay, functional assay, it showed agonist response, higher agonist response, specifically for 5-HT1A. 5-HT1A receptor, it is generally considered agonist is useful in the treatment of depressive disorders. So that's the advantage of 5-HT1A ligands. Can you go to the next slide? So that's for the highest. And I made some further derivatives. So that's what is shown in this next slide, where I've done some. So these are some compounds which showed 99% agonist response. And I also made sulfonamide based analogs of that. And they are under evaluation for agonist activity and 5-HT1A receptors. So these are some additional analogs of those piperidine containing aminothiazoles. So can you go to the next slide? Okay. So if you remember, I showed you an hypothesis, right? So using these two aminothiazole cores, the non-fused aminothiazole core and the fused aminothiazole core, and using those bioactive fragments which are reported in the literature, right? I've synthesized a library. Around 60 compounds were synthesized, and those compounds were then screened in a variety of assays: antimicrobial assay, muscarinic binding assay, and serotonin functional assay. So I've identified 5 lead compounds with MIC values in the range of 2 to 16 microgram per ml. And in the muscarinic binding assay, 3 lead compounds were identified at 10 micromolar concentration with greater than 90% inhibition of atropine binding. And in the serotonin functional assay, we found 3 lead compounds at 10 micromolar concentration with greater than 50%, around almost 100% agonist response when compared to the control. So that was specifically for 5-HT1A agonist activity. Okay, so those are the lead compounds which have been identified. Now I am to summarize. So 2-aminothiazole is a privileged structure that has begun to provide possible leads for biological targets of interest. Aminothiazole, so I've identified 5 lead compounds, right? When it comes to MIC values in the range of 2 to 16 microgram per ml, they're found to be potent antimicrobials targeting methicillin-resistant SRS strains. And then the lactone or the furanone based aminothiazoles were found to bind muscarinic receptors. I found 3 lead compounds. And the piperidine based aminothiazole showed agonist response for specifically 5-HT1A receptors. And the next slide. So lead compounds are being generated for future drug discovery efforts targeting MRSA, muscarinic, and serotonin receptors. And the future plan is to expand the library and evaluate them as GLT1, so which is the glutamate transporter 1 modulator, and also explore other possible bioisosteres. So that was also a plan. So what is if I change the aminothiazole to an aminooxazole or aminooxadiazole or aminoimidazole, what will be the effect on the biological activity? So that will be tested as possible bioisosteres of the 2-aminothiazole core. So this work was presented actually in the ACS national meeting, and also the biological activity, specifically the activity against methicillin resistant SRS, was published in Bioorganic Medchem Letters. The muscarinic and serotonin receptor is still ongoing, which has not been published. So I think that's the last slide, I guess. So those are my. I would like to thank all my the place where I did my PhD. My advisor was Daniel Canny and Dr. Maggie Abugarbia. Dr. Wayne Childers was my postdoctoral advisor, and I did most of my work in the Mulder Center for Drug Discovery Research, where I used most of the facilities, where I did the NMR and the LC mass spec screening of all my compounds, and Temple University School of Pharmacy, where this work was done. And I need to acknowledge Arulmigu Kalaslingam College of Pharmacy organizers for giving me the opportunity to present my literature and whatever research work I had done. Now I'll be happy to answer my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions?
Sir, good morning, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, this is Dr. Rajabandi from Faculty of AKCP.
Yes, sir.
Nice presentation, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Sir, how we get or access the bioactive fragment? Any library is there, sir?
Library. So actually, there is a recent book called Privileged Structure-Based Library by Larry Yett. So if you Google search it, it's a very good introduction to privileged structures. It gives a list of all the privileged structures. Whatever I've covered here is very, very minimal. It gives a comprehensive literature on what are all the privileged structures, and using any of those using all those privileged structure core, you can generate a library. The only thing is that once you've identified a core, you need to identify fragments which are going to bind to your receptor or whatever target, and then you need to try to incorporate those fragments and test it. It is likely to result in lead compound, sir. So did I answer your question, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, in in preliminary biological data, what we get in vitro
Yes.
results,
Yes, sir.
it would be possible to not beat the action in preclinical studies. It possible, sir?
I didn't get you, sir. What is that, sir?
What we get the result as a preliminary biological data
Yes, sir.
from in vitro studies,
Yes.
it would be possible to not meet the same action in preclinical studies, the same results.
It may not be the same, sir. Like, say, this is just we are at the lead generation step, sir. Right, and then we need to further optimize it, right, in order to make it. If you remember the examples I showed in that high throughput screening approach, where they initially identified a lead compound, and then they had to further lead optimize it, right? Because if I want to make it maybe there, I need to worry about the pharmacokinetics or the solubility aspects are all there, right? There are some additional parameters which I need to look into it and then make it maybe a better compound. So this is just the lead generation steps. You identify a lead compound, but further lead optimization needs to be done before you go to that step.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Any other questions, sir?
Any other questions? Any other questions? Sir, sir, you have told privilege structure library.
Yes, sir.
Sir, this is a predictive tool, or it will give a prominent solution, sir.
It's hard to say, sir. The only thing is that, say, if I were to synthesize a random library, sir, okay, I make a library and then I'm going to screen it. The likelihood of getting a hit, right, is higher when you do a privileged structure based libraries. The chances of a library hitting a biological target is higher when you have a privileged structure based library, because there are some reports in the literature where the protein target, it seems to recognize this privileged structure core, so it's able to bind because of that. So the chances of getting a lead compound with a privileged structure is more when compared to a random libraries. So that's the advantage, really.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, I am very poor in chemistry, so I had a basic doubt.
Sure, sir.
So it is similar like molecular docking, or it is some other new another tool, sir.
So molecular docking, it's you're predicting using a computational chemistry, right? So here there is more recurrence of privileged structures in the marketed drugs itself. Sir. I showed example, right, where I showed the aminothiazole core, which is present in several drugs actually. So similarly, you have these privileged structures are present in several drug units. So meaning the biological target seems to recognize this structure core. So that's a big plus when you're trying to design novel lead compounds. So this is a very good starting point actually. So there the
Okay,
prediction
sir.
is there, but you may not always have a hit there. It is compared to what you do in the lab, right? So the prediction, there is always a chance, so it may not work out. But this, there is a higher likelihood of it working out because the biological target seems to be recognizing this core structure.
Okay, thank you, sir. And you have told about in silico modeling also, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. That is also used to develop library, sir.
Yeah, that's what, sir. At least maybe some 10 years back, they used to predict, okay, this compound is going to bind. Nowadays, if you see medchem literature, now those screening approaches or the in silico models, they are used to understand a particular binding affinity. For example, after biological assay, we find that a particular compound is highly bound to a target. To understand that interaction, they use this tool. It's used as a tool to understand a particular interaction rather than predicting whether it's going to bind or not. It used to be used as a tool to predict the affinity, but nowadays that tool is rather used to explain an observed affinity. So that's how it is used these days.
Thank you, sir. Any other
Sir?
questions?
Yes, sir.
Sir, HIT is not an active compound. It's
So
chances
HIT,
to failure. No, sir?
Yes, sir. HIT and lead, there's a subtle difference, sir. HIT, the S structure activity relationship is not there, sir. When you say HIT, and when there is a lead, the structure activity relationship is there. You will observe structure activity relationship when you come to a lead. HIT, it is having affinity, but further modifications are necessary to make it a lead compound, sir. When you use a privileged structure-based library, I think we are crossing that HIT stage, and you're almost reaching on the verge of a lead compounds. I think that's the difference between HIT and leads. Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So lead compound always is a bioactive compound, sir, meaning?
Yes, sir, definitely. Lead, there is some structure activity relationship is also there when it comes to a lead,
yeah.
sir.
So might be a bioactive.
Yes, sir, definitely.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, sir, good morning, sir.
Yes, sir.
This is Arjun from AKCP, sir.
Sure, sir.
Actually, I have one basic question, sir.
Sure, sir.
Actually, I heard about microwave foods are it's not good for human health. Am I right, sir? Is it so?
Microwave.
Uh,
So I doubt it. I'm not sure about that, sir, because
actually, I'm also not sure about this.
Microwave.
But actually, I heard that this microwave foods are it's not good for health. But according to your concept, you have used microwaves for the production of lead compound.
Yeah, that's what,
if
sir.
It is not good for health. It may create
No, sir,
any
actually,
issues to.
The only thing is, when we say microwave, we think it in a very different sense. Actually, here, that is also involved in a process of heating, sir. It is just efficient heating process, nothing else.
Okay, sir.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Actually, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Sir, one final question.
Yes,
So
sir.
normally, that libraries used to store the or kept the late compounds or for HIT also, sir.
So libraries are generally each of these pharma companies, they have their own compound collections. So when they say, for example, they're going to go after a particular drug discovery area, they take those they take those library of compounds and screen it in the assay. And generally, what happens is that their compound collection, because it lacks that structural diversity and it lacks physicochemical properties, the hit rate is very less, sir. Getting a lead compound or getting some starting point, right? That's very less. It's less than 1%, they say. So if I have a privileged structure-based library with me, and if I were to screen it in assay, the likelihood of it getting to a starting point is more higher when compared to a random library, sir. That's the difference, actually.
So actually, there is around 5% deviation. Is there? You told 6%. I have some somewhere.
That's what we find is that when I use a privileged structure-based library, the number of hit rate, when you compare to a normal high throughput screening, which is less than 1%, and then here I showed an example where it is 6%, which is pretty significant, sir, difference. So the chances of getting a lead or a starting point for a lead compound is higher if I were to screen a privileged structure-based libraries.
So nowadays there are a lot of development in the technology,
Yes,
lot of
sir.
artificial intelligence tools.
Yes, sir.
So any of artificial intelligence tools has been used in the screening of drugs, sir. Like
So
predict the endpoint or molecule, future molecule, like those. Anything is there, sir?
I think it's still they are doing it. Artificial intelligence is used. I think for synthesis also they are using it. I guess nowadays they use it for synthesis and all that. But I still feel it's still a long way to go where we're going to come out with some mechanism where we're going to say, for example, so much of work is being done on the recent coronavirus, right? They're trying to come with some repurposed drugs and all that. We're still a long way to go. I feel we need to understand these all those things a bit more before we come out with a solution for any drug. We can't come, and I think we're still a long way to go when it comes to even artificial intelligence is not going to give a blockbuster drug tomorrow. I feel that way.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir, you have told the companies are individual pharmaceutical
Yes.
company. They are maintaining their privilege structure library, like that you have told, sir.
Yes.
Any
Yes, sir.
open access or commonly assessed privilege structure libraries there, sir, for like lot of molecule with lot of molecules?
To be frank, I'm not sure there's any open access like that. So it's all commercial libraries. You need to purchase those libraries, I guess. That's the only way, I guess, now. We don't have any access to open access to free access to some libraries like that. I don't think it is there, sir, in my opinion.
Okay, sir. So, what is your advice for a future chemistry researcher, sir?
Chemistry. So I would rather say if a medicinal chemist they are working on any drugs, say library synthesis, they should look at what is their target, right, and look at the literature to identify what type of fragments. Say there are reported ligands for a particular target, right? So look at the fragments and see if there is any recurring core structure, and based on that core structure they should start that library synthesis rather than randomly synthesizing some library and then testing it, sir. I think that's a very good approach if you want to have some compounds which are going to hit the target. Try to read the literature more and try to identify some recurring core structure, and then try to modify the core with structural modifications, and then it is definitely going to hit the targets.
Thank you, sir. And one final question, sir,
Yes, sir.
regarding industry. So, if
Yes,
we are
sir.
looking the Indian the pharmaceutical industry,
Yes,
mostly
sir.
in drug discovery, we are seeing lot of chemists who has a background of MSc, PhD, or
Yes, sir. Yes,
molecular
sir.
chemistry
Yes.
like that. We haven't
Yes,
seen
sir.
much of pharmaceutical chemistry background.
Yes,
So,
sir.
what is the reason behind that? If our students want to develop or generate new molecules, what are the qualities they have to improve, sir?
The organic chemistry, sir. Actually, I after my postdoc, I worked in a CRO industry, actually, Aizen Bio in Hyderabad, and I was a lead for 3 chemists. All my colleagues were all basically from chemistry background, actually. So organic chemistry, organic reaction mechanism, right? And the practical knowledge is what we lack, sir, when it comes to doing synthesis, right? Understanding the mechanism. We need to give more importance to those aspects, sir. Organic is the basics, sir. And even natural product synthesis, right? Even though you have some multi-step synthesis, if they need to start reading that literature, sir, where it say some 20 steps are there. They need to know what is happening in each of the steps. Try to understand those mechanisms. Read more of this literature, because if you want to compete with those people who have basic core organic chemistry background, right? you need to improve our organic chemistry, reaction mechanisms, natural product chemistry. That will definitely help us in competing with those people. We need to have that background. We need a very strong background.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So,
Thank you,
any other questions? Okay, sir. Sir, principal went for admission process.
Okay,
So,
sir. Okay.
yes, sir. So, thank you for spending your valuable time with us, sir. Sharing your knowledge and a lot of newer areas you brought to us. First
Thank you,
time we
sir.
are hearing
Thank you.
about the privilege-based library, those things. So,
Okay,
thank
sir.
you, sir. Thank you, sir. So whenever you are coming to India, please let us know. We can have a direct interaction with our students,
Sure, sure, sir.
especially
Sure,
on
sure.
the area of organic chemistry, to
Sure,
improve our
sure, sir.
students' knowledge.
Definitely, sir.
And also kindly refer your friends to us, sir, for our future webinars, sir, because
Sure, sure.
our
Yeah,
students are
yeah.
learning a lot from researchers like you, sir.
Thank you.
Definitely, it
Thank you.
will be a platform for them in their future growth, sir.
Sure, sure, sir. Sure.
So thank you, sir. Thank you for spending your valuable time